Welcome to episode 4 of Road to my 2026 race bike. Final decision, or maybe not. The process has been super fun, but also quite intense sometimes. It's been almost 4 months, and I've tried more bikes also that I have on my back. But I think these were the ones that stand out the most. That's why I really wanted to compare them and make sure I have the best bike for this year. Luckily, I have some really good sponsors to help me out to make sure I have all the bike with the same parts, so I compare them in the right way, not mixing different feels from different parts on different frames. In the process, I tried to test the bikes as good as I could, spending time on each of the bike without comparing them straight away from the beginning, and also trying them in different tracks, because there's tracks that are very high speed and not steep, and then other tracks that are steeper. For my preference, normally I struggle a bit more when the tracks tend to be steep. So for me, feeling good on a bike on a flat, very high speed track is not super hard, but then when it gets the other way around is when it really matters for me. The more intense part was getting the bike's dial every time, changing parts, testing different stuff. It sometimes got a bit crazy, changing settings on the shocks and a lot of hours in the workshop trying to make sure I do everything I could, and also all by myself as I was alone at home. Diving a bit into the learning of the process has been cool. This was cool to get help from the brands to tell me what was the setup they used to use in the race team, or at least as close as it could be, so I could get the bike to work similar as them. I felt like the most I learned was that it changed completely my perspective of what I like, because I used to have an idea of what the best bike possibly was for me, and I ended up changing stuff on bikes I've ridden before and having a completely different setup. So normally to choose a bike for me is very important, the first feel, the braking and entrance of the turn together, because it's something that really matters for me. Then the highest speed is very important, how the bike handles the highest speed, and also then, but not as much, the suspension, the cinematic of the bike, and the way that how the bike reacts to the ground and how deep it gets into travel or how high it stays when you ride it. Going into the initial feel of the bike, on the Santa Cruz was very easy to ride. It was super nimble, super easy to move around, but it felt a bit nervous at high speed. To the Commensal, it was a bike that I knew very well, so it wasn't super hard to get used to. But being completely honest, it was a bike that it didn't make me feel very good. It was kind of hard to feel good straight away. It felt really nice when it was rough, but it didn't feel easy to ride. And then going into the Mondraker, I would say it was very similar to the Santa Cruz. It was very easy to ride, very nimble, very easy to move around, jump, but maybe a bit more stable at high speed, but also not as nimble. Going into the braking of the bike and how it turns, this is one of the most important parts for me, because I feel it's where you gain the races. And going into the Santa Cruz, it was very interesting because I felt like the bike gave me a really comfortable position going into the turn, because I think it squats quite a bit and making feel the ground when it was rough. You could notice the ground more, but also you could notice you were slowing down very well. And then once I released the brakes, I could feel the bike putting all the weight on the front tire, what I think is something I didn't experience before, but I really enjoy it. So it made me feel the front wheel very well, and then being able to push. So the two things were I could brake late, but also without feeling I was in a rush, and then having a lot of thrust on my front tire when I was pushing. So the exit speed normally was great also with this, so it was really good. Going into the Commensal was a bit more different. It was more like a supple feel. I would feel like in more G out sections, with bigger impacts, the bike would squat a lot, but when it was more smaller bumps, the bike was still very active. And it was cool, but it was really good in one, but not as good for me in the other. So it was a bit different comparing to the other one, but also the feel to the front tire was very good. And in this bike, you could feel a lot more the balance of the bike being equal all the time, where I think it's great in some areas, but not as good in some areas for me. And then going into the Mondraker, I think it was the one it braked the best when it was flat, but then the one it braked the worst for me when it wasn't flat, because the bike is very active, but then as it's active, it doesn't squat as much. So, and I have rough break-ins, I would feel I would dive a lot more on the front. It kind of make me want to add the pressure on the fork, but then I would have the issue that off the brakes, I couldn't get the same feel. So I would say it turns really well too. Maybe the one that it turns the most on the rear tire, or I have to go more on the rear tire, but it was still pretty good, just not as my preference squatting. Going into the highest speed with the Santa Cruz, I think it was the weaker point, as I said before. And I also play around with adding some weights to the bike, and this was actually pretty surprising. I've tried weights in the past, but never experienced so much of a difference. And this time it helped. I also feel like it helped with the suspension too, because adding the weight kind of generate more inertia into the bike and like making the bike feel a bit softer. Mostly in like really high impacts, either were like straight, like many of them or just one. And it improved, but it wasn't the thing that the bike does the best, I would say. Going into the console was really good in the high speed. It was incredible. It was so easy to feel the grip. And as I say also before, like you could feel both tires locking the ground very well. So that gives you a lot of confidence and kind of like, you notice you're going fast, but the movement on the bike doesn't feel like it's going crazy. So it's like, it's a pretty good feeling. Then going in with the Mondraker, it was pretty decent, but it was close to the Santa Cruz, I think. It was really good off the brakes for me and high speed sections, but then once you brake a bit more, then I felt like I could notice a bit more like movement on the chassis, and I couldn't get it to work as smooth. So it wasn't, I would say it was like a middle point without brakes, but not so good with braking. So then going into this feel of the bike with the suspension, as I mentioned, the Santa Cruz is very easy to move, very easy to jump. So it feels like very supportive. When you press the ground, it's like you feel the ground a lot, so you get quite a lot of feedback, but also it's really easy to like move the bike because it's very responsive. But at the same time, without making you feel so bad, because when you brake, the bike kind of feels like everything's slowing down, and I think that's really cool. Maybe because it's very supportive, it doesn't feel so good at very high speed off the brakes. Going into the console, it's kind of the opposite of the Santa Cruz. It's a bike that feels very soft. When you press the ground, it like kind of squats quite a bit, but it makes the ground feel super smooth most of the time. So it's kind of like completely opposite directions, but also both were pretty good. And then I would say the Mondraker was kind of in between. It was very supple at the beginning, so you could like lose a bit of like that easiness to move the bike around. But also when you push a bit harder, then you have a lot of response, and it was really easy to move the bike. I would say it's kind of in between, but I don't know what I prefer, honestly. So trying to organize the 4 fundamentals for me on a bike, I've made a list of what's the order on the podium for each of the bike. So diving into the first impression of the bike, I would say it was kind of easy to choose the Santa Cruz. It was so easy to get well with it. I would say the Mondraker was second, and then the console was third. Diving into braking and turning, I would say the Santa Cruz is still at top. It was really good at this. I would say the console was second, and then the Mondraker was third. I would say at high speed, it was clear the console was the best one, and it was really hard to choose between the Mondraker and the Santa Cruz, but I would say the Mondraker was second, and then the Santa Cruz third. For suspension, I don't think I can choose one. I would say from my feel, the Santa Cruz and the console are so different, but are equal at the same time. So I will give both the first position, and then the Mondraker would be third. So going into the actual decision, this is all what I feel, but also at the same time, you need to make sure you're fast with it. So I wanted to time the bikes, and for this I chosen one of the tracks I know the best. I think it was easier for me to like ride 80% consistently with each bike. As I mentioned before, I had all the same parts on the bikes, so I can take away all the mixing different feels. Being completely fair with the Mondraker, the bike arrived a bit later than expected, and also I was dealing with some issues on my shoulder from the recovery from the surgery I had in the past, so I couldn't ride it as much as I wanted, and I feel like I didn't find the best setting on the shock that I would want. So this, I think, make the bike be a little bit behind the other two. So I did my track in Ponte de Lima. It was like a 4-minute track with the bikes honestly all were very close, but I would say I didn't feel as good with the Mondraker just because I didn't find the right setup, but it was still very close. It was, I think, around a second and a half slower. But then diving into the Comensal and the Santa Cruz was a bit crazy because I did exactly the same time. It was just like 1 or 2 tenths off. So I wanted to compare them again in another track in Ponte de Lima, but it ended up being the same thing just in a different order. So the first track, the Comensal won by 0.2, but then in the other track, the Santa Cruz won by 0.2 again. So I didn't really know what to do. And this is where the hardest part came. I couldn't choose one. So I think at this point, unluckily, the Mondraker came a bit later, as I say. So I want to take it away because the races are coming and I want to take a decision. So I'm going to try my best now to find the way to choose one. So I want to try to go different tracks, different scenarios, and try to test them both to see what I like best. So as this was supposed to be the end of the series, I haven't chosen one. So we're gonna know now, go straight away versus one to the other, and we're gonna dive in showing how I feel during the run, showing you my GoPro runs I did, and also diving in exactly how I felt and what I thought, but actually what ended up being faster and slower.